"I am to marry your dearest friend," said Aldous, the Duke of Sableforth, and he watched Clarissa Marrow's face across the length of the candlelit table for the flinch he was certain would come. It did not come. She lifted her fork, cut a small square of the roasted pheasant, and considered it with the mild attention of a woman deciding whether a thing was worth her chewing. The chandelier above them held 200 candles, and every one of them, it seemed to the Duke, was arranged solely to illuminate the fact that she had not looked up. "How pleasant for Lady Georgiana," she said. "She will make a magnificent duchess. Pass the salt if you would." There were 11 other people at that table, and not one of them had heard the sentence he had aimed like a pistol at her alone. He had spoken it low beneath the general clatter, a private cruelty dressed as confidence. He had spent 3 days composing it. He had imagined in the composing a dozen reactions, a paling of the cheek, a tremble of the lip, a hasty excuse to leave the room, perhaps even the small vindicating shine of tears held bravely back. He had imagined every response but the one he received, which was a request for the salt. Aldous did not move. His hand, which had been resting near the silver cellar precisely so that he might have the pleasure of not passing it, lifted the little dish and set it before her. "Thank you," Clarissa said, and salted her pheasant. He had known her 7 years. He had known her since she was a girl of 18 come to Sableforth Hall as companion to his late aunt, a poor cousin of a poor branch, with a straight back and a sharp tongue and no dowry to speak of, and he had spent 7 years being irritated by her in a manner he had never troubled to examine. She corrected his Latin. She won at chess and did not have the decency to pretend she had not meant to. She read his aunt the newspapers with a dry inflection that made the old woman shriek with laughter, and when the old woman died, Clarissa had simply stayed, kept the household books, managed the servants, ran the whole vast machine of the estate with a competence that made the stewards nervous. Because there had been nowhere else for her to go, and because, though he would not have admitted it under torture, he had never once told her to leave. He had told himself he tolerated her. He had told himself she was useful. And then, 3 weeks passed, in a moment of appalling clarity, he had understood that he watched the door of any room he entered to see whether she was in it, and that this had been true for some years, and that he was a fool. The knowledge had frightened him. A Duke of Sableforth did not marry a dowerless companion. His father would have risen from the family vault to forbid it. Society would have laughed, and Aldous had spent his entire life arranging things so that society did not laugh at him. So he had done what frightened men do. He had reached for a defense. Lady Georgiana Fenwick was suitable, wealthy, well-connected, and dull as a Sunday sermon, and he had let it be known that he might, perhaps in the fullness of time, offer for her. And tonight at dinner he had told Clarissa to test her, to learn whether she felt anything, to force her hand where his own was too cowardly to move. She had passed him nothing. She had asked for salt. "You are very calm about it," he said, and hated the smallness of his own voice. "Am I to be otherwise?" Clarissa turned to him at last, and her eyes gray, unhurried, faintly amused, the eyes of a woman who had watched him lose at chess 100 times settled on his face. "You are a duke. Dukes marry. It is nearly the whole of what you are for. Lady Georgiana has £30,000 and a profile like a coin. I congratulate you both, and I shall want the guest lists by Friday if the wedding is to be managed properly." "You will manage my wedding," he said. "I manage everything else," she said. "Why should your wedding be spared?" Down the table, old Colonel Fenn was telling the story about the fox and the bishop for the 4th time that season, and the ladies were laughing in the practiced way that ladies laughed at colonels, and the footmen moved along the walls like well-trained shadows, and Aldous, Duke of Sableforth, sat in the middle of all of it and felt the ground he had stood on all his life go soft beneath him. He had wanted her to plead. He understood that now with a hot, humiliating certainty. He had wanted her to beg him not to, so that he might have the pleasure of being begged, so that he might refuse and feel the size of his own importance, and then, perhaps, in his own time, relent. He had wanted her small so that he might feel large, and she had refused to be small. She had looked at his cruelty and passed it back to him with the salt, and in doing so had shown him precisely how large she was, and how mean he had been, and he found that he could not eat. "The pheasant is dry," he said, for something to say. "It is not," said Clarissa. "You are simply not hungry, which is unusual in you and interesting." She returned to her plate. "Was there something else you wished to tell me over dinner, your Grace, or have we exhausted your announcements?" The dinner ended as all his dinners ended, with the ladies withdrawing and the gentlemen left to their port, and Aldous sat among his neighbors and did not hear a word they said. Colonel Fenn was again upon the subject of foxes. Sir Marcus Ide was explaining, at length, and to no one, why his hounds were superior to every other man's hounds in the 3 neighboring counties. The port went round, and Aldous turned his glass by its stem, and thought only of the small square of pheasant and the request for the salt. He had made a study of Clarissa Marrow over 7 years without ever admitting that he was making one. He knew that she rose before the servants, and that the lamp in her study was often the last light burning in the hall. He knew she took her tea without sugar and her disappointments without complaint. He knew she had come to Sableforth at 18 with a single trunk and a letter of recommendation from a clergyman who had since died, and that the letter had described her as a young person of unusual sense and no expectations, and that both halves of that description had proved exactly true. He knew she had refused, over the years, at least 2 respectable offers from respectable men, a widowed apothecary in the village and a curate with a squint, because he had overheard the refusals or the aftermath of them, and had felt, on both occasions, a savage and unaccountable satisfaction that he had not troubled to name. He named it now over the port. Jealousy. He had been jealous of a squinting curate. He, the Duke of Sableforth, had spent an evening in a black temper because a poor companion had been asked to marry a man with a living of 200 a year, and he had told himself at the time that it was because good staff were hard to keep, and he had believed himself, because a man will believe almost anything sooner than the thing that frightens him. He thought, too, of the chess. It had begun in his aunt's time. The old woman had liked to watch them play of an evening, had said it was the only sport in the house worth the candles, and after her death the games had simply gone on, twice or thrice a week, in the small drawing-room, without either of them ever proposing to continue them. He was the better player, or believed himself so, and for the first year Clarissa had let him win, in the courteous way of a companion who understands her place. And then one October night she had stopped letting him win. She had taken his queen with a knight's move he had not seen coming and had said mildly, "I have been losing to you for a 12-month, your Grace, and I find I no longer have the patience for it," and had proceeded to beat him soundly, and had beaten him, more often than not, every week since. He had pretended to be affronted. In truth, those defeats were among the dearest hours of his life, though he had not known it, for they were the only hours in which anyone in England treated him as a man to be bested rather than a duke to be flattered, and he had gone to them, week upon week, the way a thirsty man goes to a well, without ever once asking himself why he was thirsty. When the gentlemen rejoined the ladies, Clarissa was gone. She had done her duty by the drawing-room, seen the tea-things brought, the candles trimmed, Lady Georgiana settled at the pianoforte, and had withdrawn to her ledgers, as she always did, invisible again, the machine of the house humming on around her while the guests it served forgot she existed. Aldous stood in the drawing-room doorway and looked at the space where she was not, and Lady Georgiana played something pretty and difficult, and looked up at him from under her lashes in the manner of a young woman who has been told a duke is nearly hers, and he smiled at her because it was expected, and felt like a thief. He did not go to the ledgers that night. He had not yet found his courage, but he began from that night to unpick in his own mind the thing he had so carelessly set in motion, and he discovered that it did not unpick easily. For the trouble was this: he had not proposed to Lady Georgiana. He had said to 2 or 3 of the right people, in the vague grand way that dukes are permitted, that the connection would please him and the world had done the rest. Lady Fenwick had heard it within the day. By the end of the week it was understood. And a thing understood, Aldous was learning, is very nearly as binding as a thing sworn, when the understanding is between families of consequence and the whole county is watching to see it kept. To draw back now would be to make a public liar of a duke and a public fool of a well-born girl. And society, which forgave dukes a great deal, did not forgive that. He had built himself a prison out of a single careless sentence, exactly as he had built one out of the sentence he had aimed at Clarissa, and he began to understand that his whole life had been an accumulation of such sentences, grand, careless, unretractable, spoken, to arrange the world into a shape that impressed it, until he stood at last in the middle of the arrangement with no room to turn around. The Fenwicks arrived 3 days later. Lady Fenwick was a woman who did not so much enter a house as annex it. Within an hour she had reorganized the seating in the morning room, criticized the arrangement of the hall flowers, and inquired of the housekeeper in a carrying voice whether the person who manages the accounts might be spared to attend upon Lady Georgiana, as a girl of her prospects ought not to be without a woman to see to her things. Aldous, passing the morning room, heard Clarissa's reply. "I am afraid the person who manages the accounts is fully occupied, my lady, in managing the accounts," she said, in the pleasant level voice that gave nothing away. "But I shall send you Sarah, who is deft with a needle and has a sweet temper, and who will suit Lady Georgiana far better than I should, being younger and less inclined to opinions." "Opinions," repeated Lady Fenwick, as though the word were a small dead thing found in the soup. "They are the great disadvantage of managing accounts," Clarissa agreed. "One develops them. I shall send Sarah within the hour." And she had swept out, not swept. That was not her way. She had walked out with her straight back and her keys at her waist and her chin at exactly the angle it always held, and had passed Aldous in the corridor without a flicker, "Your Grace," a small inclination of the head, gone. He stood in the corridor a long moment. Then he went and found his steward Portlaw and asked, for the first time in his life, to see precisely how much of Sableforth's prosperity was owed to the woman who managed its accounts, and the steward, an honest man named Portlaw who had served 3 dukes, looked at him steadily and said, "The whole of the recovery, your Grace, since your late aunt's time. She turned the home farm about when it was losing money. She caught 2 stewards thieving before me and dealt with them so quiet you never heard of it. She has saved this estate, by my reckoning, better than £4,000 in 7 years, and taken for it a companion's wage and a room at the top of the North Stair, if you'll forgive me saying so." "I forgive you," said Aldous. "Say the rest of it." "There is no rest, your Grace," said Portlaw, "except that she is the best of us and always was, and it is a shame the county cannot see it. But then the county never could see a thing that did not wear its worth on the outside." And he had gone back to his ledgers, and left the Duke of Sableforth standing among the green ranks of books that recorded, in a firm dark hand, 7 years of a devotion he had taken for a wage. He took to seeking her out on the pretext of the household accounts. "The Michaelmas figures," he said, one evening, coming into the little study off the library where she worked, where she had always worked, where a single lamp burned and the estate ledgers stood in their green ranks. "I wish to review them." "You have never wished to review them in your life," said Clarissa, not looking up from her column of figures. "You do not know a ledger from a hymnal. Sit down, your Grace, before you knock over the ink." He sat. He watched her pen move. He watched the lamplight on the side of her face, on the plain gray stuff of her gown, on the small competent hand that had held the whole of his estate together for years while he had shot pheasants and gone up to town and imagined himself important. "Portlaw tells me," he said, "that you have saved this estate £4,000. "Portlaw exaggerates. It is nearer 3. She turned a page. "Was there anything else, or did you come merely to be astonished that a woman can add?" "I came," he said, and then did not know what he had come for, or rather knew and could not say it, and so said instead, "You have never once asked me for anything. In 7 years. "What should I ask for?" A better wage, a better room, the credit for the home farm, anything. Other people ask me for things from the moment they wake, you never have. She set down her pen at last and looked at him, and there was something tired in it, something that had been held a long time. If I asked you for things, she said, I should be one of the people who ask you for things, and you would look at me the way you look at all of them, as a demand to be weighed and granted or refused. I did not wish to be weighed, Aldous. I wished to be— She stopped and pressed her lips together and picked the pen back up. It does not signify. Do you want the Michaelmas figures or not? You wish to be what? Useful, she said to the ledger. I wish to be useful. It is the only thing a woman in my position may safely wish to be. Everything else is a door that does not open, and one learns not to stand in front of doors that do not open, or one spends one's whole life bruising one's nose. He was quiet a moment, and if a door were to open— Her pen stopped. She did not look up. Doors do not open, Your Grace, for persons who manage accounts. Lady Fenwick was quite clear on the point this morning. We develop opinions and are otherwise without advantage. A breath. You are engaged to be married. You should not be sitting in my study at this hour asking me what I wish for. It is not, it will be remarked. Nothing is signed, he said. The Fenwick match, nothing is signed. Something moved behind her gray eyes, quick, and was gone. Then unsettle it if you like, she said. You are a duke. You may do as you please, you always have. That is not true, he said, and was surprised to find it was not. I have never once in my life done as I pleased. I have done as a Duke of Sableforth does. There is a difference, and I did not know it until this fortnight, and I am 40 years old, and I find it a bitter thing to learn so late. For the first time since the dinner she was silent, truly silent, not the composed silence she wore like armor, but a real one, a startled one. Her hand had gone still on the page, and then she said very low, not looking at him, Do not raise a thing in me you do not mean to answer for. I am not a girl. I have made my peace with what I am and where I sleep, and I do not sleep the worse for it, but I could— She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I could be made to sleep the worse for it, if a man who did not mean it were to sit in my study by lamplight and speak to me as though a door might open. So do not. I ask you the one thing I have ever asked you. Go up to your betrothed, and leave me my £3,000 in my room at the top of the north stair, and let me keep the peace I have paid so dear for. He went. He had not the courage yet for anything else, and he saw that to press her further that night, with nothing settled and no promise he could make good, would be a cruelty worse than the salt. But at the door he turned. I have never once looked at you, he said, as a demand to be weighed. Whatever else I have done, and I have done a great deal wrong, I have never done that. I want you to know it before I go, because I think you have believed it for 7 years, and it is not true, and I cannot bear that it is the thing you believe. And he went up the stairs to his own rooms, past the door of the guest wing where his betrothed slept the sound sleep of a girl to whom no door had ever failed to open, and he lay awake until the birds started, and knew that he had a choice to make that would cost him, whichever way he made it. The thing he had spent his life protecting, his standing, his dignity, the smooth, admiring surface of the world, and that he no longer cared for that surface at all, and had not perhaps for years, and had only just discovered it. The days that followed were the longest of his life, and he had lived through a war and the deaths of both his parents and the slow dying of an aunt he had loved better than either. He rose. He rode. He sat through dinners at which Lady Fenwick spoke of nothing but the ball, and Lady Georgiana played the pianoforte with a competence as flawless and forgettable as everything else about her, and Clarissa Marrow did not appear, having pleaded, through the housekeeper, the pressure of the quarter's accounts. He knew what she was doing. She was removing herself, brick by brick, from the parts of the house he moved in, so that when the thing was done, when the announcement was made and the engagement sealed, she should have already accustomed herself to the distance. She was managing her own heart the way she managed the home farm, prudently, quietly, cutting the losses before they could grow. It was the most sensible thing in the world, and it very nearly broke him, because he understood at last that she had been managing it for years. The composure at the dinner table had not been indifference. It had been the last and hardest work of a woman who had loved without hope for a long time and had learned to do it without a sound. Twice he went as far as the door of the little study, and twice he turned back because he had nothing yet to offer her but words, and she had asked him plainly not to bring her words. She had asked for a door that opened or no door at all. And a door, he was discovering, does not open by wishing. It opens by the breaking of the wall it is set in, and the wall was his whole life, and a man does not break the wall of his whole life quietly, in a study by lamplight. He breaks it in the open where everyone can see, or he does not truly break it at all. He understood then what he would have to do, and where, and how much it would cost, and he was afraid. He who had faced a French cavalry charge without his heart moving faster than a walk. He was afraid of a ballroom and a girl in white and the laughter of his neighbors. But he was more afraid now of the top of the North Stair, and the lamp that burned there late, and the woman who would carry her 3,000 pounds of thrift and her unopened door up those stairs every night for the rest of her life, alone, because a duke had wanted to feel large and had been too much a coward to feel loved. He would not be that duke. He had been for 40 years. He would not be him for one more night than he had to. He sent for his steward Portlaw the morning of the ball and gave certain instructions, quiet ones, concerning settlements and a certain small property, and a matter of law, and Portlaw heard them out with his honest steady face, and at the end of them said only, "Very good, your grace. And might I say it is the first instruction you have given me in 7 years that Miss Marrow herself would have approved," and left before the Duke could reply, which was as well, because the Duke could not, just then, have replied at all. The betrothal ball was set for the last Thursday of the month, and it was to be, Lady Fenwick declared, the event of the season, an announcement to the whole county, past which no gentleman of honor could withdraw. Aldous understood the strategy. He had used it himself in other matters. Make a thing public and it becomes a debt. A man will pay in misery what he would never pay in coin, sooner than be thought to have broken his word. He did not sleep the 3 nights before. He walked the long gallery of the hall in the dark, among the portraits of the dukes who had made him, all of them married to the correct women, all of them, he thought, staring down at him with the smug certainty of men who had never once in their lives asked for the salt and been outmaneuvered by it. On the night of the ballroom was gold, as Clarissa had ordered, and it was full of the county's best, and the chandeliers were lit, and Lady Georgiana stood at the head of the room in white satin looking, it had to be said, magnificent and entirely content, a coin about to be spent well. And Clarissa Marrow stood against the far wall in her plain dark gown with the household keys still at her waist, because she was staff, because she had arranged all of it and would take no credit and would slip away the moment the dancing began. And Aldous looked from the one woman to the other and knew, with a clean and terrible certainty, which of them he could not live without. Lady Fenwick was already moving toward the small dais, gathering the room's attention, preparing the moment of announcement. In a minute less, she would call for silence and speak his name and the name of her daughter, and the debt would be sealed, and he would be a man of honor bound for the rest of his life to a coin. He thought in the half-second before he moved of every duke in the long gallery upstairs, every correct marriage, every smooth admiring surface his family had maintained across 4 generations, and he thought of his father, who had married a woman he did not love because she was the right woman, and had died a cold man in a cold house, respected by all and mourned truly by none. He had spent 40 years afraid of becoming that man. He saw now that he had been becoming him all along, by the very carefulness meant to prevent it, and that there was exactly one act left in the world that could turn him from that road, and that it would take him 3 seconds and cost him the good opinion of every soul in the room, and that he had never in his life wanted anything so little as he wanted their good opinion now. He crossed the ballroom. He did not cross it toward the dais. He crossed it toward the far wall, past the astonished faces, past Lady Georgiana's parting lips, past the whole staring gold-lit county, and he stopped before Clarissa Marrow, who watched him come with an expression he had never once seen on her. No composure in it at all, only a naked and unguarded fear. The fear of a woman who has spent a fortnight bracing for a wound and cannot bear to have the hope of its healing raised and dashed in the same public breath. "Do not," she said, very low. "Aldous, do not do this to me in front of them, whatever it is. I have kept my dignity through the whole of it. Do not take it from me now for a gesture." "It is not a gesture," he said, and his voice, to his own surprise, did not shake. "I have made one announcement over dinner, and it was a lie, and I have spent a fortnight being punished for it, and rightly. I will make the true one now, and I will make it loudly, because you deserve to be chosen loudly, and I have hidden you in the accounts of this house for 7 years like a thing I was ashamed to own, and I am ashamed, but of that, only of that, and never of you." The room had gone silent. Lady Fenwick stood frozen at the dais with her mouth open on a name that would never now be spoken. "There is no dowry," Clarissa said. It was not an argument. It was the last stone in a wall she no longer had the strength to hold up. "There is no name. They will laugh at you. You have arranged your whole life so that they will never laugh at you." "Let them laugh," said Aldous, Duke of Sableforth, and he took her cold, competent hand in both of his, there in the gold light before all of them. "I have discovered I would rather be laughed at with you than admired without you. It is not a near thing. It is not a close-run sum. Marry me, Clarissa. Not because I am a duke. You have never once been impressed by that, and it is among the reasons I cannot do without you, but because there is no room I have entered in 7 years that I have not searched for your face, and I am tired, I am so tired, of pretending I do not know why." For a long moment she did not speak, and he stood with her hand in his and the whole county watching and staked everything. He was on the gray, unhurried eyes that had beaten him at chess 100 times. "You," said Clarissa at last, and her voice was not steady now, not steady at all, "are the most exasperating man in England, and you cannot read a ledger, and you announce this appallingly, and yes," a breath, half a laugh, wholly a sob, "yes, you impossible man, yes." He raised her hand and pressed it to his lips, and the ballroom, which did not know whether it had witnessed a scandal or a fairy story, and would spend the rest of the season deciding, began, uncertainly, to applaud. Lady Fenwick, to her lasting credit, recovered faster than anyone. She had not built a life out of ambition and whalebone by allowing herself to be seen defeated, and she gathered her daughter and her dignity, and within the quarter hour, was assuring anyone who would listen that, of course, she had always suspected the Duke's heart lay elsewhere, that Lady Georgiana had never truly been more than a favoured guest, and that a girl of £30,000 need hardly weep over a Duke who preferred bookkeeping to breeding. It was a magnificent performance, and Aldous, watching it from across the room with Clarissa's hand still in his, found that he admired the woman more in her retreat than he ever had in her advance. He sent Lady Georgiana, some weeks later, a gift so handsome that it silenced the last of the county's tongues, and the girl, who was not unkind, only untroubled, wrote back a note of thanks so genuinely relieved that he understood she had wanted the match no more than he had, and had only, like him, been carried by the great engine of what everyone expected. He kept her note. It seemed to him a small monument to how many lives were spent obeying the wishes of a world that did not, in the end, much care. There was, before the wedding, one conversation he had dreaded above all others, and it was not with the county nor with his lawyers but with himself, alone in the long gallery before the portraits. He went up on a gray afternoon and stood a long while before his father's picture, the cold, correct man in the correct dark coat, and he said aloud, to the paint, the thing he had never dared say to the living man. "You were wrong," he told his father. "You taught me that a Sableforth marries to preserve the name, and that a man's dignity is the good opinion of people he despises, and I believed you for 40 years, and it made me small. She is worth more than the whole of the county's regard, and I mean to have her, and I am done being your son in this one thing." The portrait did not answer, of course. But he came down the gallery stairs lighter than he had gone up them, and he never afterward feared that painted face again, and he thought that perhaps the laying of ghosts was less a matter of magic than of finally saying, out loud and to their faces, the words one had swallowed while they lived. They were married in the spring, in the village church at Sableforth, with the household in the front pews and Lady Georgiana, who bore no grudge, having secured within the month the Marquis with £40,000 and a far better profile, sending a handsome gift. Clarissa gave up the household keys to a housekeeper, and took up the Duchess's seat with the same brisk competence she had brought to everything. And if the county had expected to look down on the dowerless companion who had caught a duke, it found her impossible to look down upon, for she looked back with those level grey eyes, and it was somehow always the county that lowered its gaze. The instructions he had given Portlaw on the morning of the ball came to light in their own time, and were spoken of in the county for a season after. He had settled upon Clarissa, before ever he crossed that ballroom floor, a small property of her own and an income independent of him, drawn up in law so that whatever her answer had been, yes or no, she should never again in her life be a woman without a door of her own to open. When she learned of it, she was angrier than he had ever seen her, and then she wept, which he had never seen at all, and then she said that it was the only truly clever thing he had ever done without her help, and he took the compliment, for he had learned to take what she gave and be glad of it. She kept the ledgers still. She could not be persuaded to give them up, and after a while he stopped trying, for he found he liked the sight of her at the desk with the lamp on the side of her face, and he took to sitting with her of an evening while she worked, pretending to read, watching her pen move down the columns that had held his house together for 7 years before he had troubled to notice. Sometimes she read him a figure that pleased her, and sometimes he understood it, and she was as delighted by his understanding as if he had been a promising pupil, which, in the matter of loving her, he supposed he was. On their first evening as man and wife, they dined alone at the long table where he had once aimed his cruelty at her, and the chandelier held its 200 candles, and Aldous reached, out of long habit, for the salt cellar and set it before her before she could ask. Clarissa looked at it. Then she looked at him, and the corner of her mouth turned up in the old dry way that had irritated and enchanted him for 7 years. "You are learning," she said. "I have a good teacher," said the Duke of Sableforth, "though she wins at chess and does not have the decency to pretend she did not mean to." "I never will," said his Duchess, and passed him the salt he had not asked for, because she had learned over 7 years exactly what he needed before he knew to want it, and because that, in the end, and not the dowry the county had wept over, was the whole of what a marriage was made of.